David, I've been traveling around and moving around through various cities so much lately. It's almost feels weird to be back in the studio. Do I sound any different than previously?
Well, I detect, and maybe that's my imagination, you're a bit subdued because of the horrors that you've witnessed, to which I think is something very close to a coup d'etat on the 20th of January. Over to you.
Yeah, I think you might be referring to some of the conversations we've had leading up until today, because you're right in your assessment of my demeanor, but I've actually made some upgrades here in the apartment. Even though I'm leaving, I had all this foam sound baffling material and I've put it on that wall over there. Real audiophiles have complained about the room ring in this apartment, so I'm trying to control that a bit. We're going to be doing our regular Friday sponsor-exclusive show in just an hour at 2 p.m. Eastern on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, and subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. David, what are we going to be discussing today?
Well, I think this term that you and I sort of focused on yesterday in our preliminary discussions, this notion of Trudeau infected nodes. Well, I'm very excited about it because it provides some continuity right back to Pierre Trudeau and what I would argue were his treasonous activities, not necessarily starting during World War II, but almost immediately afterwards, where he went on an amazing tour, including a period at Harvard and then the Sorbonne and the London School of Economics, and comes back to Canada, eventually to become Prime Minister in the 1980 period. And I believe, as Prime Minister, he oversaw or was aware of the shipments of tainted blood from the Arkansas prison system by Bill Clinton up to Canada through a broker in Montreal to be fractionated at Connaught Laboratories and ultimately exported as a plasma abroad to drive what appears to be the HIV and Hep C epidemic, which killed and injured a huge number of people. So the concept of a Trudeau infected node business model, I think, should have a lot of relevance to Americans at this stage or post-election blues, if you will, because Joe Biden has said, I believe, that wearing masks is the duty of patriots, which I think is laughable beyond belief. Over to you.
It's interesting, David. You know, there's a lot of new rules about what can and cannot be said on various social media platforms, including YouTube right now. People in the chat are telling us that they're getting deleted from Facebook. I think regular viewers know that Crowdsource the Truth and Jason Goodman personally have been removed from Facebook. It's a kind of a pain in the ass, David, but one of the ways that people can help us get around this really troubling censorship. I mean, it's absolutely the elimination of freedom of speech. We just don't have it. We see the president of the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, doesn't have it. And anybody who supports him is in danger of being depersoned, deplatformed, and just basically minimized. So people can join us in Subscribestar and Patreon and be able to see the contents that we want to share with people, but the tech oligarchs won't allow us to. There's something else, David, in today's collage that I wanted to discuss with you, that the thing that is really, I think, kind of interesting, one of the things that's interesting about our shows is that there's this massive through line of basically backstory that we've been following for years now, and the raid, the RCMP, FBI, and IRS raid on Starnet Communications in 1991 has been a really important focus of ours. I think you know, and I believe you share my feelings, that QAnon was a trap, a sandbox, a disinformation operation, and that sort of stuff is happening all the time. But it's strange to me that the mainstream media tries to make it seem ridiculous by saying, oh, well, it's a conspiracy theory about pedophiles controlling the world. they want they want the public to laugh at that, but we have so much evidence, whether it's the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Peter Nygaard. We've heard about the associates of Justin Trudeau, including Christopher Charles Ingveldsson, who were in fact involved in an international pedophile ring. And you've told us extensively about how the raid at 425 Carroll Street revealed that the company in there, Starnet Communications, was engaged in, pornography and gambling. We've got this native culture symbology here. I wanted to share something really interesting with you, David, because in the process of creating today's image, I discovered something painted on the alleyway here that I hadn't seen before that seems really related. Can you see these images? It looks like a First Nations, Native American family with a child at the center and this predatory bird hovering over them that looks very similar to the mural painted on the building, which you and I were told by a local that was a warning. And here we see even more imagery that's reminiscent of that bird painted on the wall. We've also looked at Justin Trudeau's tattoo in the past. What do you think about all this, David?
Well, yeah, the symbology is connected. I remember as a teenager, I think there's a book called The Migration of Symbols. So symbols, obviously, they can change, like the swastika. The meaning of the swastika changed over generations or hundreds of years. But there's a core concept here. So you've got the shoulder of Justin Trudeau, you've got the image and the mural of the downtown east side, and you've got the carving outside the BBC Broadcasting House, where a naked, sexualized boy, Jesus, if you will, appears to be in a crucifixion mode, with two angels or two winged creatures serenading him. I'm not sure I've got the right word there, and holding that book to his private parts with the carving Obsculta on it. And Obsculta is, and I keep telling people, and thanks, that was an input from one of our listeners, that Obsculta is the first word of the Benedictine Creed, listen and obey. Well, if you look at America today, or the Five Eyes countries generally, I think the public, and I shake my head, is listening and obeying, and its head is drooping because it doesn't really understand what the hell is going on. Well, I think now we can say that the world at the moment is the victim of a Trudeau-injected node attack through the signals intelligence network of the Five Eyes countries. So I think it's very important to understand what the symbology means or what we think it means in Vancouver, in the context of life in the downtown east side. Now, I arrived in Vancouver or BC in 92, so I've been here nearly, 30 years. I had made a previous visit in 1981, where I attended the International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence up at the University of British Columbia, which I believe is one of three post-secondary educational institutes that is at the core of the Trudeau infected node attack on the Five Eyes countries.
Before we get to that, let's just make sure that everybody watching us now is aware of this infected node concept, because another major recurring aspect of what you and I have been discussing is the fate of this guy who was the first civilian director of the RCMP intelligence department. We're talking about Cameron Ordus, who's been accused of leaking information to Phantom Secure. But you and I have seen evidence that causes us to believe that, like so many authentic whistleblowers, perhaps he was set up and had a crime falsely attributed to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he discovered the theory and practice of Trudeau infected node attacks. Now, as you point out, the roommate of Justin Trudeau, Christopher Charles Ingveldsson, was charged, convicted, and incarcerated as the director of an international pedophile ring. And Christopher Charles Ingveldsson was is an alumnus of UBC, like Justin Trudeau, and like like Dr. Cameron Ortis, who wrote his PhD thesis up there under the supervision of Professor Brian Jobe. And the title of the thesis was Bowing to Quirinus, which is a Roman cult god of authority, and compromised nodes and cybersecurity in East Asia. So I think that thesis was written 2006. Maybe it's the... Yeah, 2006. And it's a fascinatingly worded document showing great prescience, I think. And then presumably this man takes on a career that ultimately puts him in the position of being the civilian director of the RCMP, where I think he discovered and was about to expose the Trudeau infected node attack on the Five Eyes countries that dates back to Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who very quickly we can say that he was kicked out of Reserve Officers Training School in Montreal during World War II. He then, with independent means from his wealthy father, went on a little academic tour to Harvard, the Sorbonne, and the London School of Economics. And then he came back in wherever, and he fetched up ultimately in 1980 as the Prime Minister of Canada. So there you have a guy profoundly and deeply corrupt, in my opinion, treasonous, and a diehard fan of Mao Zedong, who he met in 1973 to exchange, I allege, details of all of Canada's weapons technology and the Five Eyes technology to the Communist Chinese. And that began, I believe, the support and the drive for China ultimately to get to an extraordinary position on 911, which I believe was inside the defenses of the United States as the attack of 911 attributed to Osama bin Laden developed. And actually through technology developed by UBC alumni, stand down the key nodes of America needed to defend itself against the 911 attacks. Over to you.
David, I just Googled Cameron Ortis. It's become a bit of a weekly ritual here because there's been so little information about what's going on with him that whenever we do the show, I happen to be Googling him to see what's going on. And there's been some reporting in the past week. The Montreal Gazette asks, who could be our next Governor General? The great one, Prince Harry, Kim Campbell. What is the Governor General of Canada?
Well, he or she is the acting on behalf of the monarch, the reigning monarch, which is Queen Elizabeth II, right? Because Canada is a constitutional monarchy, and it's a member of, a whole number of nations around the world that have survived and I would argue flourished, because on the whole, there's no ethnic, like whether you're Muslim or Indian or Pakistan or whatever it is. Many of these countries, outstanding countries, are actually members of the British Commonwealth. And
now, wait a minute.
Of course.
Sorry, I think I'm confused because, okay, so it's saying one of the old governors, asking who would be the Governor General. Retired governors generals sort of have a bad habit of billing their former employer into oblivion. But then it mentions Cameron Ortis as a Chinese spy. This is the reporting it was referring to in the search. So it says, let's just say that Canada doesn't have the best reputation of late at standing up to the People's Republic of China. So we might as well just own it and put an agent for Beijing in the job. This is a strange thing for the Montreal Gazette to say, but it's remarkably similar to what has happened in the election in the United States. It goes on to say Cameron Ortis, a former RCMP intelligence officer arrested for allegedly turning over secrets to China. But is that what we heard? He was arrested for turning over secrets to Phantom Secure, is what we've been hearing. He's already in custody, so moving him to Rideau Hall could be framed as a lateral move. I don't understand.
Well, that I think is the ultimate tongue-in-cheek, because if, as I believe, that Cameron Ortis had discovered the Trudeau-infected node attacks on the Five Eyes countries, then from Justin Trudeau's point of view, the most important thing to do is shut this guy up, put him behind bars. which is why I believe that we need a habeas corpus release, at least to appear in front of Parliament with Justin Trudeau. And then Justin Trudeau is the de facto, if not de jure, custodian of Dr. Ortiz, needs to prove before Parliament, or we the people, that Dr. Ortiz is legitimately detained. And I don't think he will be able to, because I think this Trudeau infected node network actually is probably triumphant at the moment, because it's managed to get what I believe the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, would describe as a revolutionary guerrilla organization in control of the government of the United States. Over to you.
Before we get to Milley, because that's important, and we do want to talk about that, I just want to stay on Cameron Ortiz for a moment. All the reporting that we've been hearing is that he was giving information to a criminal network. Now, just today, the Montreal Gazette introduces this seemingly new, possibly parallel narrative that he's a spy for China. Have we heard that before?
Well, they talk about providing Five Eyes secrets to the enemy of the Five Eyes countries, you see. They didn't go further than that, but this is very interesting, and you're showing the listeners what I hadn't seen before. But again, I think as we have aired the idea that Dr. Ortiz should have a writ of habeas corpus, so we understand whether or not the custodian or the jailer of the man has actually detained him legitimately, of course, that could reveal more details of the Trudeau infected node attack on the Five Eyes countries. Can I just quickly dig into how those nodes might have been infected?
Sure.
Because it's very important. So from 1997 to the time of his arrest, Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, and his incarceration, that's 13 years where this man is alleged to have directed an international child or pedophile ring. Now that's 13 years where, if we sustain or take on the momentum of what was going on at Starnet in 4 years had built an operation with a market cap nearly $1 billion of trading in hardcore adult and child pornography out of 425 Carroll Street in 60 countries. Jason, how many victims, and I'm not just talking about the appalling crimes done to the children that I believe were killed or processed or trafficked out of Vancouver, but the people who, for whatever reason, because we don't know the context, had downloaded some of this child pornography, or someone had used their stolen credit cards to download it, so that they could be framed with committing a crime of downloading child pornography. I would say there's quite possibly hundreds of thousands of people who can be set up to make it look as though they're downloading child pornography, which is a criminal act, and then blackmailed and extorted.
Yeah.
And I think that's the principal component of control, listen and obey, administered through Trudeau infected nodes, which is, if you don't do what you're told, we'll expose you as a pedophile. And that can be done very simply through the
or
partners of that. Yes.
Put that stuff on your computer.
Yes, exactly. Like I think was done or attempted to be done to me. And then surprisingly, the guy who sent the link, I went to the Surrey police and I said, I think I've been attacked with, I forget the language I actually used, but the police told me, well, you better download it before you can issue a complaint. So that defeats the purpose. How stupid. Yeah. But maybe they didn't. But let me come back to this.
Well, wait, let me just ask you something about Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, because this news report makes a point of telling us that it was a child pornography, some kind of Facebook thing. So it's interesting that Facebook, we're getting messages in our chat right now from people who are being removed from Facebook, either for watching our show or posting things about the 17th letter of the alphabet, or their questions about the election, or whatever they might be posting. But Facebook doesn't seem as aggressive about removing child pornography. These guys were trading in it on Facebook. Kind of interesting.
Well, absolutely. And so I come back to the three partners of that child-based network that was set up, I believe, in June of 2001 as a hack, if you will, of the Ministry Children and Family Development of UBC. So it operated a virtual private network in a government department, right? Which of course is what they call hidden in plain view. So that child-based operation has three partners: Images Technologies, which is run or was run by Oliver Buck-Revell, the guy who apparently strode onto the tarmac at Heathrow Airport and
He
removed his
denies
son
it.
and daughter-in-law. Well, I know he denies it, but he brought an action against someone who said it happened, and ultimately that action was dismissed. So that's not the same
Went
thing
all the
as
way to the
proving he
Supreme
actually,
Court.
yeah. So obviously Oliver Buck-Revell found it fairly significant. In 1994, he's the counter-terrorism expert, I believe, or counterintelligence expert within the FBI. He slithers up to Vancouver and starts this Images Technologies, which now is a world leader, I believe, it may have changed its name, in face recognition technology using artificial intelligence. And he has been tracking people through the police and the welfare, and I would suggest enemy of the Five Eyes countries, including China. So now this network, this Trudeau infected node network, is able to track the innocent and the guilty, the compromised and the uncompromised, the children, the rooms in which they're abused or allegedly abused, and millions of images of faces. And the AI then puts it all together and links, for example, a child that's been abused horribly, let's say, a room in a hotel, a Marriott hotel, one of the 1 million hotels around the world, and someone who was in that hotel, either before or after the child was abused, who's had a credit card stolen. This is a protection racket, Jason, a global international protection racket run by or for or on behalf of Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of Canada. Now, that means people like targeted areas, or like New York and Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm very, very sure that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell would represent a compromised node which could one day be used to shut down New York for a revolutionary guerrilla organization. And judging from your tours of New York and again in Washington, they've been extraordinarily successful over the years.
Well, not only that, David, the FBI is trying to label this movement surrounding the 17th letter of the alphabet as a domestic terrorism operation. And it's interesting because I don't know. Look, I certainly don't support it. I think it's stupid. I think it's a trap. But I haven't seen people who do support it running around New York City or the rest of the country burning down buildings all summer. That seemed to be people who were in support of Antifa, yet the FBI hasn't been sending out warnings about that. We know that they've removed any accounts that spoke about the 17th letter of the alphabet, but they let Antifa hang out on there all at once. I did see an article earlier, maybe it was on Zero Hedge or something, saying that whoever was writing this article hypothesized that the FBI itself had created the movement surrounding the 17th letter of the alphabet. It does seem to be, David, remarkably similar in certain ways to Able Danger, and Field McConnell himself became an ardent supporter of that thing right around the same time that you and I went our separate ways from Able Danger. It seems another one of these sandbox operations where they get everybody trapped in there and then they put the lid on it and everybody's in there.
Yes, and suddenly deprived of the ability to communicate. And as an engineer, I find the phrase conspiracy theory absolutely ridiculous, because we know there's a conspiracy, right? Including in the 9/11 attack. No one person, even Osama bin Laden, straddling a yak in a cave in Afghanistan, could have put on a show like that. So we know there are multiple players that would form a conspiracy. We know there's planning required, and we know there's exquisitely sophisticated technology to do it, just like sending these clowns into the Capitol building. But let me back up here. So with Dr. Ortiz, right, he, having written that thesis, then becomes the the head of intelligence for the RCMP, the first civilian director. Well, what would he do consistent with his work on the thesis? He would start looking for these compromised nodes or infected nodes. And I believe you can't identify a compromised node until you get, or unless you get inside it, right? Particularly if it's a international pedophile ring or a pedophile ring operating in New York, which is what I believe Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were doing with the Clintons. So the Clintons would very likely have been trapped in a Trudeau infected node, right? Starting perhaps around the 1990s period when Ghislaine Maxwell flew in from the UK. I think she came in on Concorde, didn't she? She set up with, I think, $50,000 a year sinecure from the estate left by her father, who had stolen from the Daily Mirror pension fund. So he was a crook. They found him floating off the back of the Lady Ghislaine boat, but that's kind of by the by. So who would she have been in contact with if she was being deployed or employed by the Trudeau infected node to infect the elite in New York and set them up with a pedophile trap such that they could be filmed and subsequently extorted and blackmailed? Well, obviously, the Clintons would be a prime target, fast-tracked ultimately to President of the United States, and then you can do with the guy what you want, including cutting deals with the Communist Chinese. For example, when Bill Clinton sent the then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Shalikashvili, to China in 1997 to address a meeting with the People's Liberation Army generals, where he's quoted as saying, excuse me, "I've been instructed by my president," that's Clinton, "to leave behind details of all of America's weapons programs." So America, don't be surprised when it comes back to bite you. If you give your enemy...
It's the same plan you're suggesting that Pierre Trudeau was on, to just give the Chinese all the military secrets. I mean, it makes no sense if actually defending the country that you're the president or prime minister of is the objective.
And let's go fast forward to Shalikashvili treasonously gave details of all of America's weapons programs that it would have needed to defend itself on 9/11 and how to stand those assets down to the People's Liberation Army in 1997. By then, Huawei had backdoored Nortel equipment and Nortel services, including the joint automated booking system that Nortel had sold to the Department of Justice. So Huawei would have been in a position to track all of the prisoners and parolees on 9/11, and for that matter, the attack on the East African embassies and the USS Cole. So Shalikashvili, I believe, is a traitor. He's dead now. For what it's worth, he was the son of Dmitry Shalikashvili, who was a major in the Waffen SS.
This is actually very important, David, because when I was driving to Washington, D.C., I was listening on Audible to The Devil's Chessboard, which is a book that goes into great detail about the formation of the CIA and specifically Allen Dulles and his really astounding affinity for and connection to Nazi war criminals, and his role in Operation Paperclip in bringing some of these Nazis into the United States and embedding them in NASA and various agencies in the United States government, including the CIA. So the concept that John Shalikashvili or his father would have been directly involved with the CIA is really supported by the reporting in this book, The Devil's Chessboard.
Oh, totally. And of course, the CIA grew out of the OSS, which is the American equivalent of the Special Operations Executive, founded by Churchill to set Europe on fire during the Nazi occupation. So you've got a continuity of method, which goes back to the brilliant double-cross operations that were grandfathered from the BBC and RCA. But again, fast forward, because then there's another Joint Chiefs of Staff at the present time that I believe has behaved in a way tantamount to treason, because I think he was absolutely instrumental in staging the January the 6th and the January 6th invasion of the Capitol building, by a revolutionary guerrilla organization. And the reason for that assertion is that he wrote a paper. It's as important to what happened on the 6th of January as, I believe, Dr. Ortis's thesis on compromised nodes and cybersecurity in East Asia is to the Trudeau conspiracy, if you will. Because Mark Milley, right, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he became Trump's top military advisor. But isn't it interesting from a geostrategic point of view to think of getting a Joint Chiefs of Staff in a position where he's inside the walls, right, and potentially able to structure a revolutionary guerrilla organization coup d'etat on the 20th of January this year? Because isn't that what's happened? A revolutionary guerrilla organization of the type he wrote his thesis about at Princeton appears to have taken over the United States. Because let's just take hypothetically Kamala Harris, right, who could well be the 47th president of the United States. There's been no background check on this woman, but I believe she's an expert in revolutionary guerrilla organization.
Let's just stay on one idea at a time here. You're talking about Mark Milley, and this is important. Let's stay on that for a second.
Sure.
So the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you and I had discussed, seems to be a pretty treasonous organization from its inception. This is not something that the founding fathers of America said that the president should have. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, let's see here. On July 20th, 1942, Fleet Admiral William Leahy became Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief. He was not technically the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Leahy's office was the precursor to the post of chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That was created and first held by the General of the Army, Omar Bradley, in 1949. So what do we know about how this Joint Chiefs of Staff was created, what power it has? It becomes, as you start to delve into some of these things, David, understanding what power the President of the United States actually has, particularly with regard to the military, when you've got the Joint Chiefs of Staff there. There was some significant change to it made during Ronald Reagan's presidency, where the president reports directly to the Secretary of Defense, and then that person interfaces with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's a mess of bureaucracy and who controls what.
Well, I think there we have to get to the technology, and maybe you've got that picture of the Defense Red Switch network telephone or phone on the desk of the Oval Office back in the days of Obama. You have an IST-2 phone made by Raytheon, which is one of the nodes of the Five Eyes networks. It's a very important node that I believe got compromised. Now, that's sitting on his desk. I think when Obama arrived there, he's technologically and scientifically illiterate. And one of his phrases is, "Where are my cool phones?" Well, this phone is incredibly cool, even if it's not spectacular in modern terms, because you can see those red buttons, FO, F, I, and P. FO is flash override. And that means the President of the United States can push the FO button and be in voice contact anywhere in the world these folks are, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the line commanders of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. And if you are trying to respond to an attack on the scale of 9/11, which was quite obviously an attempted coup d'etat, which failed back then for various reasons, but is succeeding very well now, if you can't get hold of these people, or you've moved the President of the United States so he's not in position to get hold of that phone and talk to these people, such as on 911, because what these clowns did is they got George Bush at the school in Florida, well away from, any power of what was going on in Washington or in the Oval Office. And you got the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff back then, Hugh Shelton, who launched the data mining system called Able Danger. And General Hugh Shelton, is on a plane going to a NATO conference in Warsaw or whatever. On the way back, it is said that he was going to be knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. Now, isn't that interesting? I can't find any pictures of having the sword laid on his shoulder by Queen Elizabeth II, but let me put to the US military hierarchy, is it right that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff should be knighted by the Queen Elizabeth II? I believe he's not allowed to accept that kind of honor, because then you've got a conflict of interest.
I asked Charles about that, and he said that it has been done. Like, there are presidents and things. It's like an honor, not a military thing. But I agree with you, David. It sounds weird.
That's good for Charles, because what happens if she was knighting him because he was instrumental in standing down America's defenses during this Trudeau infected node attack on 911, such that he would usher in this revolutionary guerrilla organization to take over the government? Anyway, my point is about the technology. What happened to that phone on the desk of Obama is it was taken away by someone, I believe.
No, but wait a minute. You keep introducing these very important things that we need to talk about, and then moving off of them. You're whipsawing the audience back and forth. So this guy, Hugh Shelton, he's pretty important. And he wrote a book in 2010 called Without Hesitation, The Odyssey of an American Warrior. I don't know why these guys are always writing these books, because they kind of give away a lot of stuff. In this book, he talks about how on that NATO trip, he was flying in a plane called the Speckled Trout, which is a C-135. It's some kind of special Boeing plane, a C-135 Stratolifter, which, David, this is a very important and unique plane. It was a prototype Boeing 367-80 jet, which was also the basis for the 707. That was the first Air Force One and Boeing's most advanced jet in the 1950s when they first built this thing. Now, this is another aircraft that's been in operation since 1956, particularly since it's the government using it. It causes me to believe that there's something very special about this aircraft that would be extremely difficult to retrofit to a new aircraft. And I don't mean necessarily technologically, but perhaps things were done with this plane at a time when certain oversight wasn't in place, and changing the aircraft might trigger some other involvement of other government agencies. But this plane has been used by Lyndon Johnson, Robert McNamara. It's had all kinds of technology installed on it that, including technology that would, let's see, there was something in here that I sent to you that was like a real, it can communicate with KC-46 aircraft, which, remember, I have speculated that the KC-46 may well have been what was used to crash into the South Tower, and we've long discussed how, someone was controlling the attack.
Well, it could have been controlled. First of all, let's argue. It couldn't have been controlled by George Bush at the school, right? He didn't have this terminal or this facility anywhere near him, as far as I'm aware. It could have been controlled by Hugh Shelton. He's got the plane, he's got the technology, he's got access to the chain of command for the Marine Corps, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and he would have access through the Federal Bridge to all of the nodes whose certificates needed to be revoked, so they would stand down and allow this ragtag army of guys wielding box cutters to hop into planes, fly them through maneuvers that even Top Gun fighter pilots could fly, and basically attempt the overthrow of the United States government by force, right? So Hugh Shelton has a lot of questions. I don't know whether he's still around, right? A lot of questions to answer.
He is still alive.
Yeah, okay, but he probably won't explain it. But he would be a classic example of an attempted coup d'etat that would require the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to be inside the walls and treasonously betraying his country for the coup to have any chance of success. So I think Hugh Shelton, I think that Able Danger data mining, in retrospect, when I heard and saw the spelling, It was I who chose the spelling of Able danger as Abel danger, and I communicated with Phil McConnell, and we set it up in good faith. But I think, like you said, I think now it was a sandbox, basically to take me down into the sandbox. And, you know, I thank everyone who advised me to get out, because I think that was the right thing to do. That's allowed me to work with you, and basically from outside the sandbox, which is the only way to work. I think your 17th letter alphabet was another one.
Yeah.
I think this child base operation run through by the BC Ministry of Children and Families, I think that's a front for an international pedophile ring engaged in entrapment and blackmail and extortion in over 60 countries, using the technology provided by alumni of the University of British Columbia. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, that child-based thing is definitely strange, that they keep a database of, you know, abusers and abused children. I mean, obviously...
And images,
yeah,
right, of hotels in the world where they can, for whatever techniques, maybe they set up someone who's a person potentially of influence. He or she gets to stay in a hotel, and either the night before or the night after, an actor dressed in that individual's clothing abuses a child, right, that has been brought in, and 6 months later, the individual to be extorted or blackmailed gets a little clip that indicates perhaps to the spouse or employer that this individual is a pedophile. And that network is being operated, I allege, through the Ministry of Children and Family Development in British Columbia. And basically the network, the Trudeau infected node network, is hidden in plain view. Over to you.
Speaking of things happening in plain view, David, I mean, as we said at the top of this conversation, there's a lot of evidence and information that there is an international pedophile ring. The arrest of Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Peter Nygard. We've seen, you know, Jimmy Savile, Heath, right? And also Dennis Hastner. There's no doubt that there are people getting away with this stuff and attempting to do it. So it's interesting that all of the mainstream criticism of the 17th letter of the alphabet operation doesn't talk about the fact that it's an anonymous thing made by someone who we don't know what their purpose is. It does seem quite logical that if the FBI or the NSA or whoever is investigating this type of stuff, if they didn't want it to continue, they could certainly figure out who's dropping this stuff. There's a limited number of people who have this level of clearance, and the NSA can allegedly track any digital anything coming from anywhere. So the fact that that thing is out there is suspect in my mind. And what I perceive that is frequently done, David, if there is a problem that's getting exposed, like wealthy elites are using a pedophile network to entrap people, to get scientists and medical professionals and politicians to do what they want in their effort to control the world, basically. If that starts getting exposed, the people who are behind it want to create one of these, you know, sandbox operations to trap everybody investigating it, everybody with any information about it, trap them in that sandbox, and then somehow make that sandbox look ridiculous or dub it criminal. They say that anybody following that 17th letter of the alphabet is a domestic terrorist. They haven't said similar things about violent outbursts that have occurred in the name of Black Lives Matter or Antifa. That's very interesting. I think those things have arguably caused more violence and destruction than the 17th letter of the alphabet, but there's been a very concerted effort to villainize anybody having anything to do with that stupid movement.
And I think you're absolutely right. And what is subtle and complex and difficult for many people to follow is the idea that that phrase I thought was very powerful, the RCMP coined in 2000, I think it was a law enforcement conference in Toronto. They said modern organized crime is so sophisticated now it has got to the heart of Parliament itself, and it operates as a virtual floating matrix where people, for whatever reason, they can be pulled off their day job for an operation maybe of 1 hour or a day or 30 hours, like the stand down during the war game exercises on the 1st and 2nd of June, and then they return to their day job, and it's all done through the internet or on the Federal Bridge, so there's no paper trail. So these organizations, which require a whole series of Trudeau-infected nodes around the world, they can be dialed up, turned on, and then disappear. And for all I know, that 17th letter of the alphabet may have been set up by people like that, who actually were extorted or blackmailed into forming it to create a magnet for everyone speculating about it, and then have the FBI dismiss it as a conspiracy theory and a threat. But let's just remind people of the raid on Starnet on the 20th of August of 1999. Now, there were 150 law enforcement officers. That is huge, coming from the IRS and the US Customs and the FBI and the CIA. In Canada, the Vancouver Police and the RCMP and the high-tech squad, they took away all the evidence of a hardcore adult and child pornography operation in 60 countries, which had been running since 1996, set up, I allege, by Justin Trudeau, who would have been 25 at the time. So he's young, but he's perfectly capable of doing it. And then run by Justin Trudeau and his pedophile roommate as an international pedophile ring. And I would describe that as basically a set of Trudeau-infected nodes around the world, which can turn on some of the most powerful people in the world and turn them off again, including possibly getting Trump to walk out with a whimper and not with a bang, because I was always amazed that he went so quietly. But one of the reasons he went quietly is because they cut his legs off in terms of his ability to communicate with the people who supported him. Over to you.
I think it was more than that, David. I think that, you know, we've spoken a lot about when Boris Johnson went to the hospital with coronavirus and when Trump went to the hospital with coronavirus. It really was a remarkable recovery. There were certainly key points in Trump's presidency where it seemed like, if you recall back in, I guess, March, you know, Trump was initially saying, hey, we've had Ebola, we've had N1H1. This is really no different than that. Go back to work, forget about it. And then within like a day, he seemed to shift to we're at war with coronavirus. So that was definitely a shift. He also, you know, he campaigned on hashtag lock her up. And then at some point during his presidency, he said, like, he's not that worried about Hillary Clinton and she's a nice person. And people were perplexed by that.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, likewise, he always appeared without a mask. And then there was that one photo in the Washington Post where Trump had the big presidential mask on, looking right in the camera. And I was thinking to myself, this is a captured president.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And I think he has a lifestyle that probably gave these people multiple opportunities to entrap him and blackmail him. Now, when he got elected as president in 2016, they expected Hillary to slide in, right? So it was totally unexpected that he came in, I think. And one of the things, while he still have the energy that he succeeded in, is getting this charge with the Department of Justice against Huawei in Brooklyn court for serial racketeering theft of intellectual property. Now, the plaintiffs, so to speak, named in that action include Cisco and Motorola. What wasn't named, because, you know, there's no administration of justice against organized crime in Canada, was the attack on Nortel. Because I believe by 1995, McDonald Detweiler, this company founded by two alumni from UBC, had basically installed backdoors, Huawei backdoors, into Nortel's, Cisco, and Motorola technology, ready for the 9/11 attack. Now, so they were really upset when that indictment was unsealed in Brooklyn court against Huawei, where they've got Meng Wanzhou on an ankle bracelet in Vancouver. And what I believe they're going to be pressurizing Biden to do is get the charge against Huawei dropped, get Meng Wanzhou sent back to China, where she'll be treated as a hero, and continue with this technology that is sitting behind the revolutionary guerrilla organization, which has presently taken power in the United States. But my proviso is, what is the Latin phrase,
Fraud vitiates everything. Right. Now, we're almost out of time, David, but you've also just reminded me that we forgot to delve into Mark Milley. We've just basically been on so many different topics, but, you know, Mark Milley, was it Milley or was it Hugh Shelton? Who wrote that PhD? It was Milley who wrote the PhD thesis about
a critical analysis of revolutionary guerrilla organization in theory and practice. So, and this is from Princeton University, which is another one of these universities where you have, how shall I put it, a parasitical intellectual elite cerebrating about how to take over the United States government by force.
Sorry, it was a senior thesis, not a PhD thesis. That's why I was having a hard time finding that. But critical analysis of revolutionary guerrilla organization in theory and practice. Certainly Antifa and any army related to the 17th letter of the alphabet would, by very definition, be a guerrilla organization. We're going to definitely delve deeper into this bit of writing by Mark Milley and some of the other historically seemingly treasonous acts of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We're almost out of time over here, but in less than 10 minutes, we're going to begin our sponsor exclusive segment on subscribestar.com/reverse-CSI, patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, and subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Real quickly, David, in 2 minutes, if you want to just wrap up the YouTube segment and get ready for the sponsor exclusive segment, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've told a few of my friends that I want to launch a public campaign to revoke the charters of 3 post-secondary educational institutes, one in Canada, one in the United States, and one in London, for their role or the role of their alumni and faculty in setting up these Trudeau infected node attacks on the Five Eyes countries. The Canadian institute is, I believe, the University of British Columbia, right, whose alumni have actually facilitated the attack of 9/11. In the case of Harvard, Harvard was, how shall I put it, a sponsor or a spokesperson or a collaborator with Pierre Trudeau in his travels around the world, where he fetched up at the London School of Economics and came back schooled in the art of British Fabianism, which supports the idea of government by an elite, centralized credit, and, emphasis, depopulation. Right? So this virus, one needs to look at it in the way it's being spread. It's a culling tool for people who are out of favor with the intellectual elite, whether they're black or whether they're First Nations or whatever. And it is totally ruthless. They want to bring the Earth's population down to preserve themselves in positions of extraordinary power, using this model of a revolutionary guerrilla organization to control the world. Over to you.
Right here on the Fabians.org. They want to educate, agitate, and organize. Wow.
They've won. Well, they've won temporarily, but coming back to Fraus omnia vitiate, fraud vitiates everything. And if, as we can prove, that Dominion voting machine was used to...
Wait a minute. Don't even say it, David. Hang on.
Okay, all right.
This is the type of stuff we need to discuss on Patreon and Subscribestar, because YouTube is changing their rules daily, and there are certain words that we can say that will trigger an attack on the channel that I'm trying to avoid. We're just about out of time over here. We're going to get more in depth on this senior thesis written by current, well, I guess he's current, maybe they'll change, but this is Mark Alexander Milley wrote this thing. It's 185 pages. It's available online, data space. We'll have to see if we can find this thing, but it's telling me that the Princeton Library is closed. Maybe this is it. We'll keep looking for that. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with our sponsor exclusive segment. I want to thank all the sponsors that make this show possible. Please join us on Subscribestar or Patreon, and we'll be back in just 5 minutes. Thanks for watching, everybody.